my primary area of research and love has been the Psalms. It's a book that I've come to love for its honesty and many qualities actually about it. So I want to say a few words, things you need to know as we get into the study of the Psalms. Tradition has always associated the book with the person of David. Many Psalms are associated with David by virtue of their superscription, and there are many Psalms that are associated with others by virtue of their superscription. The question is the superscription a claim to authorship? All the superscription, when you normally see in the text of David or to David, it's just this. It's the Hebrew prefix that is then attached to the word. So you can have le David, you can have le Asaph, you can have le Moshe, you can have to whoever you want to talk about, whether it's Asaph or Moses or Solomon. The reality is a lot of things could be conveyed by that. Is it of David, as in belonging to David? Is it to David as in for David? Is it about David? Is it concerning David? Is it in the style of David? And all of those can be inferred by that simple prefix. So I say associated with. I don't know if it's a claim to authorship or not. David himself is mentioned in almost half the Psalms. In the Masoretic text, 73 of the Psalms are associated with David. We also have some associated with Asaph, the sons of Korah, one of the first boy bands in history. Moses, Solomon. There are 34 Psalms that don't have any individual associated with them, that are just simply anonymous. It surprises some to learn that the book of Psalms itself is actually 5 books. The 5 books of Psalms, book 1, 1 to 41, book 2, 42 to 72, book 3, 73 to 89, book 4, 90 to 106, and book 5, 107 to 150. Of those 73 Davidic Psalms, the majority of them are in those first 2 books. In fact, Psalm 72, the very last verse of Psalm 72 says, the prayers of David, son of Jesse, are ended. But they aren't quite so ended, because there is another Davidic Psalm in book 3, there are 2 in book 4, and a slew in book 5. So many wonder if these books actually represent stages of composition. So you had earlier hymn books. At one point the Psalter may have just ended at book 2, but people are always writing worship songs. And so they started being added on in those individual books at the end. It's possible. Israel knew how to come into the worship of God, and they knew how to behave when they got there. And for that reason, I think it's helpful to look at the Psalms. And when they came to that worship, they used a variety of songs. There are a variety of different genres that come into this. Those genres were really first classified by a man by the name of Hermann Gunkel. Gunkel revolutionized psalm study, and it would be hard to overestimate his significance in biblical studies. Even those later on who disagreed with him often used his methodology to disagree with him. I think you win the fight at that point when that happens. But he was sort of the first to notice these family resemblances between psalms. He would put them in genres, just like we can talk about musical genres, country, hip-hop, pop, whatever you want to put them in. He noticed sort of genres of psalms, hymns and community laments and individual psalms of thanksgiving and royal psalms and a whole slew of other types of psalms that he noticed that all had sort of similar features. Just like you always have a driving bass in a hip-hop song, or you always have a steel guitar in a country song, or you always have these different elements. He noticed those same kind of relationships across the genres of the Psalms as well. He had a person who followed him up named Sigmund Mowinckel. Mowinckel wanted to look at how those different genres of Gunkel's functioned in worship. So he began to examine the connection between the worship of ancient Israel and these psalms. And he focused on pre-exilic worship in Jerusalem. So where Gunkel would ask the question, what kind of psalm is this? Mowinckel would ask the question, how was this psalm used? Now, Gunkel and Mowinckel's method of interpreting the Psalms dominated psalm study for half a century. It was really not until you get into the late 70s and 80s that you started to see people starting to think in terms of the psalm a little bit differently. And you got what were called canonical interpretations. Now, 2 kinds of canonical interpretations that are probably important. The first I'll talk about is that which focuses on the shaping of the Psalms. Now, shaping in this case means the way in which the Psalms came together, the book came together. So how the canon came to be. Gerald Wilson and Nancy DeClasse Walford are 2 of the foremost scholars who are looking at the text in this way. Both of them tended to focus on the seams of those books I was talking about. So Psalm 41, 42, 72, 73, 89, 90. Those seam books, they felt, were the places you might notice ability to editorialize or notice some clues into how a book might have come together. The other kind of canonical shaping that you can find is shape of the Psalter. So where Wilson and de Classe-Walford were looking at how the Psalms came together, scholars who followed more directly in Brevard-Childs' interpretation, focused on the shape of the Psalter. Is there something to be learned by reading the Psalms in context? And different scholars have read it a variety of ways. Walter Brueggemann has read the entire Psalter as a journey of faith, starting with the naive obedience of Psalm 1 to the naive praise of Psalm 150, and the emotional and spiritual journey that goes as you read through the Psalter. My own research is focused on how the Psalter as a story represents wrestling with the fall of Davidic monarchy. David is no longer king. How do you deal with that as you go through the story of the Psalter? James Mays focuses on the kingship of Yahweh. So there are a lot of different ways in which you can look at the text, whether you're looking at the individual genres like Gunkel, how they function in worship like Mowinckel, how the Psalms came together like Wilson, or the story that they tell as those scholars talked about. So all of these elements that you find there, all of these traditions referenced, all the other traditions of Israel, the Exodus, the patriarchs, others referenced in the Psalms, all are going to provide sort of an interesting, I think, dialogue as we look at some of the other texts of the Old Testament as well. Hopefully we can do that as we go through class.